Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Making Waves to Move to Joy. This is a series of mini webinars where Johanna and I get real about the ebb and flow of finding lasting joy and happiness as women and as leaders. So, as we go through this series, we'll be unpacking some of the top reasons that women leaders really struggle to find joy by sharing our stories and exploring some of the lessons we have learned to recapture that joy, and then sharing with you how you might be able to apply those lessons to reignite your own joy. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for Marie for that warm welcome. And for those who are, attending live with us, we'd love to just hear from you quickly in the chat as we get started. And what is, one thing that has actually brought you joy in the last week? And for me, I'm Johanna Danaher, and for me, my joy was actually having my daughter visit from college for the long weekend. She is a sophomore at the University of New Hampshire, which is about 3 hours away from home. So we don't get to see her that often. And it was just wonderful to have that time together, apple picking, going to corn maze, really enjoying the fall weather. And what about you, Marie?
Yeah, so for me, I actually had an opportunity earlier this week to connect with someone that I had not seen in several years. We used to bike together. She was an entrepreneur before I was. She had returned to corporate and was really kind of struggling with some decisions she needed to make. And so we just got together over coffee and really tried to talk through some of those really tough decisions that we often have to make as leaders as we're trying to choose our path and our careers. So, all right. So, as we start to get started here, we are here to help you get the most value from this session. So, if you joined because you want to understand why you lost your joy, you're looking for a clear path to regaining your spark and learning how to sustain it in your work, this is definitely where we want to be and a great use of kind of your time as we talk about the emotional ups and downs. If, however, um, diving deep into those ups and downs isn't for you, or you're very happy in your career and where you are right now, we do encourage you to use your valuable time elsewhere. So, and while we do have some returning attendees, we do have some new people in the audience who don't know us. So, Johanna, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you. And you can see here on the slide, I'm Johanna Danaher, and I am a leadership and executive coaching specialist. I focus on supporting midlife, mid-career professionals navigating change, individuals who have really built their meaningful lives and successful careers, and they know there's something shifting and they're not sure what comes next. It's really all about focusing in on how do we thrive in that changing environment. So whether you're navigating a transition, a reinvention, you're going through menopause, or you're feeling this pull towards work and life that feels more aligned and energizing, that's the kind of work that I focus in on. And Marie, what about you?
Yeah, so I work with mission driven leaders who created a great life, but know there's something more for them, but aren't really sure what's next. And so my specific focus is with aspiring entrepreneurs who are planning their exit from corporate to launch their business that's aligned with their purpose. They really want to kind of change that corporate hustle for happiness. And then I also work with established founders who've built a great business, but are kind of feeling a little stuck, overwhelmed, and they're asking why their dream business feels so much like that corporate grind that they left behind.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting, Marie, when you talk about the different groups and the audiences that you're speaking to, because that's exactly who we're trying to reach in this 6-part webinar series to help you gain insights into what's blocking your joyful career path. And after these conversations, we invite you to connect with either Marie or myself for a free coffee chat, right? To explore your personalized path to joy, whether you're a leader in the corporate environment or whether you are an established or an aspiring entrepreneur like the two of us.
Yeah. So you've met us. Let's start to dig in to today's content. So, in episode 3, we talked about the endless hustle and that myth of I have to do it all. And so, in today's episode, we're going to talk about another one of those myths that really isolates us, the myth of the solo climb. And so, Johanna, let's dig into some of those stories and the origins, at least for you and I, but that are probably very similar for most of our attendees. So, when you look back on your career, Johanna, where did you feel like you were all alone?
Yeah, so when I think about this myth, my mind goes back to actually when I first entered the corporate world. And I spent 25 years of my career in the corporate world. But when I started as a temporary employee. So there was no safety net, there was no clear career path for me, and there was not much confidence that I had the right skills to succeed. And that's where this myth for me really started. It was this belief that if I just really worked hard, I could prove that I belonged, that I should be able to handle everything that came my way, and that asking for help might actually make others question whether I was capable. And fast forward a few years, I actually transitioned into a full time role with the company that I spent my career with. And I was starting to take on some leadership responsibilities. And on the surface, things looked great. But that mindset, that solo climb mindset, was still actually sort of quietly running under the surface. And I remember one project where I had taken on way too much. I was trying to deliver results across multiple teams, convinced that if I could just keep it all moving, I'd prove that I was ready for the next level. And what ended up happening is I actually stopped delegating. I started working late nights, trying to stitch everything together myself, believing that that's what strong leadership looked like. The project did meet its goals. It had gone off the rails a little bit, but it did meet its goals. But I was exhausted. And honestly, I was also a little resentful that no one seemed to notice how much effort it had taken for me. And that's when my leader pulled me aside and said to me, "You know, Johanna, you don't have to do everything alone to be good at what you do." And that actually stopped me in my tracks, right? I had built my entire sense of leadership about being reliable, being the one who could always deliver no matter the circumstances. And in that one moment, in that one conversation, she disrupted that entire belief system. She reminded me that leadership isn't about how much you can carry, it's about having the clarity and the confidence to not carry it all alone. And what about you, Marie?
Yeah, and so, that clarity and confidence, right? That feeling of carrying it all can be so heavy. And when we started to talk about these questions, right, and asking about when we have felt alone, it's really interesting because I laugh a little bit. Even my hobby, which is marathon swimming, sounds like something that you do alone, when in reality, marathon swimming really takes a team of people, both there with you at the time and then in the background. And so in my professional life, right, if you were to look on the surface, you'd see that same pattern. Um, I started as an educator. So there's only one teacher usually in a classroom. There are team teachers, but very few of them. I then switched to IT where I managed a help desk. Most companies, there's one help desk, therefore there's one help desk manager. And then we looked at, um, as I moved into project management, while there are other project managers in my company on a project, I'm it. I'm the only one. And so we carried that into my role as an entrepreneur. And it starts and ends with me. I have to figure out how to update my website, how to do the marketing, how to do the business taxes. Really, anything outside of how to be a coach, I either have to learn it or purchase it. And then if I do decide to purchase it, I got to figure out like where's a reliable source? Can I afford a quality team member? What's the price in dollar amount versus the cost and results in time? And so if I do ask for advice, right, on who to purchase from, I got to find somebody in a similar situation or a similar geographic area and hope that I have enough relationship with them that I can trust. And so all of that feels very isolating. It feels very overwhelming. Um, and not just mentally, but physically. So, in addition to the sheer number of things you have to do as an entrepreneur, there's also that weight of feeling like you have to make the right decision. And that pressure really just starts that cycle or continues that cycle of making you feel even more isolated.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, Marie. That sense of being the only one really does show up in so many different ways. And it's normal, right, for all of us to feel that pressure that you spoke about, whether you're leading a team or you're running your own business. But for our listeners, we'd also love to hear from you, in the chat, maybe about where a time you also have, felt alone. Do either of our stories, resonate with you and your own experience? And while you're chatting that in, Marie, let's also talk a little bit about, maybe why this emotion sort of comes up and why we so often do feel like we're alone in our careers.
Yeah. So for me, it's interesting because when I really dig in, right, when I started to dig into some of these topics with my coach and even as we were preparing for this, it comes down to fear. Underneath it all, if I keep asking why, it gets down to fear of not looking competent, which is another way of saying fear of failure. And so for me, it might have started with those group projects in school. I was a straight A student, wanted to keep that straight A. And then even though it was a group project and everybody was supposed to do their part, you'd share a grade, it rarely seemed to work as true teamwork. It really felt like individual pieces, and then you were relying on other people. And that disconnectedness kind of followed me into corporate, both as an educator and help desk manager, and then especially as a project manager. Everyone has a solo part, but that spirit of teamwork and collaboration just really isn't there. And then you go to an entrepreneur, right? And as entrepreneurs, we don't even have the illusion of having a team to help us find those creative solutions. So we end up with our to-do lists, having to-do lists, and we often get bogged down either in a single task or so paralyzed by the amount of work that's out there that we just truly shut down. And that's when you really feel alone. You have you have to do it all. You're isolated in this bubble. You've got only these whirling thoughts in your head for company and really no connection to others to help us see those new perspectives and create new ideas. Um, and that feels very heavy and very lonely.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I think you're so right, Marie. That loneliness you described, it runs deep, right? And it can affect us in any sense of the work that we're doing, whether we're a leader, whether we're, a team member, or whether we're an entrepreneur. And as you said, it's not just that fear of not looking competent. It is the exhaustion of feeling unseen. And from a leadership perspective, when you're the one that others rely on, sometimes people assume that you're fine, right? But they rarely see the weight that you might be carrying underneath. And what happens, especially in leadership, that actually reinforces the belief that strength means self sufficiency. That if others don't see you struggle, you just have to manage it quietly. And I told that story about learning that I didn't have to do it alone, but the pattern still found its way back in over and over again throughout my career. And another example I can share is leading a different cross-functional project. And this is where my goals were actually tied to outcomes that I didn't control. Another division deprioritized the work. And even though my team delivered on everything that we could deliver on, we delivered on our expectations because the goal wasn't met, because the other division deprioritized it. my review from a performance perspective also took a hit, and with it, my bonus. And in that moment, the old story sort of came rushing back in. You can't rely on anyone else. You have to protect yourself. You have to do it yourself. You have to do it alone. And I think that's the trap that so many of us can fall into, right? When something goes wrong, we tighten our grip. We convince ourselves that carrying more will somehow make us safer. And the truth is, many organizations reward that response. We're praised for composure, for decisiveness, for results, for not asking for help or admitting that we're stretched. And for many women at senior levels, right, the self reliance started as a survival skill, a way to earn credibility in spaces where we had to prove we belonged. But what begins as a strength can harden into protection, right? The higher we climb, the fewer people we feel we can lean on, and the more we equate composure with competence. That self reliance then becomes emotional armor. It shields us from judgment, but it also distances us from genuine connection. And I think that's why the myth of the solo climb is so persistent. It's not just about workload, it's about identity. We're taught that strong leaders carry it all, when in reality, the most effective leaders know when to share the load. And I think the real work for all of us is noticing when that emotional armor starts to come back in ourselves or in our teams, and having the courage to set it down before it weighs us down, because that's where trust and collaboration and genuine joy have that room to return.
Yeah, and I think, Johanna, that it's so true, right? When we even think, we talk about climbing the corporate ladder, we talk about getting to the top, and it's always done with that slope. And the higher you get, the fewer people there are, and the more protection you feel like you need. And so it's so interesting. You mentioned how it kind of comes back over and over and shows up again and again. And that's what's really interesting, is that even as we think we've learned some of these lessons, right, we end up going, oh my gosh, that's the same thing again. And so, yeah, right. And so before we kind of move into how we can break free of this myth of having to be alone and be solo as we become better leaders and get to the top, right? On a scale of 1 to 5, I'd like to find out from our attendees in the chat. With 1 as being completely alone and 5 as you have a great team, how are you feeling about your current job or business? And as you guys are thinking about that and popping that into the chat for us, I really want to ask, Johanna, how do we overcome this feeling of isolation and this heaviness of wearing this armor?
Yeah, so I think one of the most powerful ways is to start asking for help, right? And just as important, it's to ask others, how can I help? I think that small shift changes everything. It turns independence into interdependence. And it reminds us that connection isn't weakness. It's really what keeps us going. But we can't just talk about asking for help. We actually have to normalize it, especially as leaders. So many of us were rewarded early on for having answers, not questions, for being capable, decisive, composed. Somewhere along the line, asking for help might have started feeling like exposing a crack in that image, like we might lose credibility. And so we do what we always do. We carry it ourselves, we figure it out, we stay late, and the myth lives on. And so I also think that, we're talking a lot about this, Marie, about the lens of leadership or entrepreneurship, but I also do want to acknowledge that there may be some listeners who are in the midst of, a furlough or a layoff or a long job search. That's its own kind of climb. You're already asking for help every day, right? Through networking, through applications and interviews. So the myth can actually show up differently in that situation. It can sound like I have to say yes to every opportunity, or I don't deserve to rest until I land something new. It can look like carrying the stress alone or comparing your journey to others who seem to be landing faster. But even then, you don't have to hold every piece by yourself. Sometimes progress looks like pausing, regrouping, or letting others lift part of that load. Somewhere along the way, many of us started equating asking for help with weakness, when I believe it's one of the clearest signs of strong leadership. It opens the door to collaboration and trust. It opens the door to others to be able to also say, I need help, right? It's the courage to say, I can't do this alone. And it's the wisdom to know that I don't have to. What about your thoughts, Marie?
Yeah, so I love how you talked about it's not just within a corporation or as an entrepreneur, but a job search can feel horribly overwhelming and so isolating because it is truly rejection after rejection after rejection. And it's hard to find optimism in that pattern of rejection when you're stressed, burnt out, overwhelmed. And so trying to find that optimism so the climb feels lighter is tricky for people that are in a job search because they are isolated, in corporations, often because of the culture of corporations. And then for entrepreneurs, we have to first realize we're not actually alone, which is really kind of a differentiator because it's like, well, you're an entrepreneur, you're a solo founder. How are you not alone? Solos in the very name we've created of solopreneurs. And so some team members for entrepreneurs are obvious, right? So I'm not great with graphic design, so I almost always hire out my graphic design. And while those types of partners are great for filling kind of the gaps in your skill set, they don't really help with that emotional need for connection. They help your to do list, but not that optimism and joy. And so, how do we find that how I can bounce that idea off of you kind of relationships that lead to brainstorming? It has to be very deliberate for entrepreneurs. It does not grow organically. You have to actually cultivate and create that community and partnerships. So, in order for us to find this, as you talked about, we have to ask for help. But then, most importantly, I think as an entrepreneur building that community, it's truly asking how you can help, whether that is, just a little piece like you need some help with this, where can I help you there? But truly coming from that place of service really creates a door opener. And when you go from there, right, sometimes it's having a cup of coffee because it's kind of awkward asking for help with people you barely know, right? And so that cup of coffee, I actually had a cup of coffee with somebody and now I'm part of a great accountability group with a set of new entrepreneurs. Um, you can join some professional groups. I'm starting a community of practice with one of my local professional groups. And so there's always places to find out where you can get some help and some connection. I know, Johanna, you and I met less than a year ago
Less
at
than a year
a
ago.
less than a year ago at our coach training, and we're doing webinars now together.
Yeah.
And I am very lucky in the sense that I have found a lot of people that I can do similar things with. And I use the term luck, but it's luck that has been created. And the important thing for our attendees today is you can make those connections. You have that control. It's not all, um, the luck of the draw. And it is very well worth it to take those 15 seconds.
Yeah, I love that, Marie, the idea of the 15 seconds of courage to start that conversation. And that applies in the corporate environment as well, right? You never know who has an idea that could support you. You never know who has had a similar experience, right? That you can actually engage in and learn from. So that's what breaking free from this solo climb is really all about. It's about choosing connection even when it feels easier to stay independent. And I think when we talk about breaking free, it's not about doing less, right? It's about doing it differently. And we have three small practical steps for our listeners to start. And I'm just going to bring up, I think, the slides again so you can see what these three ideas are. And so the three practical steps, we talked about it already. It's about asking for help intentionally. So when you do reach out, as Marie was talking about, be specific. Here's what I'm working on, and here's where I'm stuck. Do you have 10 minutes to brainstorm? It gives others a real way to contribute, and it helps turn from something that might be a little uncomfortable into something that's collaborative. And it demonstrates authenticity and vulnerability.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that is offer help generously. Take those 15 seconds of courage and at the next time you're out somewhere and say, hey, great chatting with you. How can I help you? What's something that you're working on that you might need some assistance with? It really helps shift that energy from isolation to shared purpose. And it really creates that choice and makes a habit out of that choice instead of just a reaction. And you eventually build that trust and strengthens that community and collaboration. So you have that needed connection with people.
Yeah, and I'll close it up, but also just highlight it's also about protecting your energy like it's a resource because it is. Every connection requires capacity. You don't have to say yes to everything. Build small pauses into your week, check in with yourself before saying yes, take a walk, reach out to someone who lifts you up, right? These are the moments that help keep that optimism Marie mentioned before grounded and sustainable. It might be a great opportunity, but if it doesn't align to where your energy flows, it may not be the right one for you to pursue. So again, think about protecting your energy because those connections require that capacity in us.
Yeah. And so remember that you don't have to climb faster or climb harder or do it all yourself. You just have to stop climbing alone. And true optimism and joy live in that space where you create authentic connection and honest conversation. And if you are ready to find a trusted partner to help you find those new possibilities, then definitely connect with us because you don't have to find your path alone.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have some sessions that are coming up in the next couple of months, and we'll explore additional myths that can actually pull you away from the work and the life that you actually want, and how you can steer back towards joy. So we've got two sessions, one on November 3rd, which is the myth of the unemotional professional, and one on November 20th, which is the myth of the perfect time to start. So we hope that you will join us again for another conversation as we talk about these experiences that we've had. We've share our our view on these different myths, and we bust those myths with three ways that you can implement in your lives to really cultivate that joy.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us on this journey back to joy. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And remember, feel free to book a coffee connection with either Marie or myself. You can see here on the slide the way that you can get in touch with us at our website or also on our LinkedIn's. So feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. Feel free to visit our website and sign up for a complimentary coffee connection. We'd love to meet you one-on-one and have a great rest of your afternoon, your morning, your evening, wherever you are in the world. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much.
Bye. Nice job.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I
Stop the
stop
recording.
the recording. Stop recording. There we go.